Hello, welcome to Miniature Realms. My name's Stuart, and in this video we're going to be painting an Astra Militarum Rogal Dorn. I prepared the Rogal Dorn tank by priming it black, and I've also left all of its weapon options unglued. I left the turret removable and the crew removable as well for easy painting. I'm actually going to start with a white stripe that I'm having towards the front of the tank, and we've got Wizard Grey, Carcharodon Grey and Trooper White, all from the Two Thin Coats range. I'm very simply layering up those three paints with the airbrush, probably 50-50 with water thinned all the way up to the white. So we've got this nice smooth white with a little bit of grey around the edges. And once that is fully dry, I want to protect it, so I'm going to mask it off so I can do all of the other colours without getting paint on that nice white. I'm using Modeler's masking tape here. Tamiya makes some fantastic stuff in loads of different sizes. This is a cheaper version that seems to be pretty much the same thing from Amazon. It sticks very, very nicely, but it's quite gentle and doesn't peel paint off as you remove it. More Two Thin Coats, and this little triad here is Gizmo Fur, Manticore Ochre and Cerebus Brown. And we're starting with the Gizmo Fur, which is the darker colour. And I'm just slowly building this up now all over the rest of the tank. Again, this is thinned in the airbrush, probably 50-50 with water. Just plain water. You can use airbrush thinner. I found that this works absolutely fine with water in this instance. And I'm just slowly building these layers up. I don't want it to go on too thick and to pull. And I'm also trying to keep it a little bit within the armour panels. And the reason I do that is it just leaves a little bit of black showing in the recesses or in between the panels, which really helps to define them and add a little shadow. And I just carry on around the rest of the tank. We've got the turret parts, the weapons here. Now we're moving on to the mid-tone, which is the Manticore Ochre. And it looks quite bright there in the bottle, but it's quite desaturated. And when you add a nice thin layer over the Gizmo Brown, it just really kind of highlights it, which is exactly what it's going to do as part of a triad. And one of the things I like to do when I'm painting tanks is make them a little bit lighter towards the bottom on the sides. This is an artistic choice rather than anything that's sort of hyper-realistic, but I just quite like the way it looks, focusing on that lighter part towards the bottom, slightly darker towards the top of the panel. And you'll see me copy that over onto the turret later on as well. I'm following the same rules as before where possible, just trying to stick within certain areas so you've got that sort of natural breakup between each of the panels. You can see it's very subtle, but just by focusing in the centres there, you're just leaving a little bit of the darker paint showing through and that black from the previous primed layer, and it just really kind of builds it up slowly and helps sort of generate a little bit of shadow. Coming to the main guns, I'm focusing now towards the top, which is the opposite of going to the bottom on the sides. But as we go back to the turret, I'm back to that side-on thing again of making sure it looks a little bit brighter at the bottom. You'll just see that transition there from top to bottom with it getting light at the bottom. I just like the way it looks. Obviously, when you get to the top of the turret, you are highlighting as normal. And now moving on to that final highlight layer, the Cerberus Brown. It looks quite light here. I'm doing very, very small highlights again onto the bottoms of the wheels, just at the front and in the middle. Same with these bottom panels, but I'm not moving it too high. Again, focusing it towards the bottom of the tank, almost as if the light's coming down at a slight angle. As we move to the top of the tank, just very, very subtle mounts in the middle of these panels there, just to give it a slight lift, but not too much. You can see here I'm really focusing on the top where the light would hit when it comes to the tops of the guns. And likewise when we get to the turret, just a very faint little highlight in the middle. Before a final one, just really accentuating that slightly lighter bottom on the side. This is always a fun part, if slightly nerve-wracking, so it's time to peel away the masking and hopefully to reveal a nice untouched white area. And we have that nice little white stripe at the front. Nice and stylized, but I think that looks pretty cool. Miniature Realms is proudly sponsored by Baron of Dice, premium wargaming dice. Over 500 styles, over 4,000 customer reviews. Welcome to the best dice on the planet. Check out the link in the video description below. There's plenty of Astra Militarum themed dice or any other faction depending on what you play. If you use the code Miniature Realms at checkout, you can get 5% off as well. We've got the base colours for the tank down, so it's time to get the base metallics down. This is Decayed Metal from Scale Colours Metal and Alchemy range. Now, You can airbrush this, I quite often do, but I'll need to mask off this end of the turret here, or this end of the gun. I thought it would just be quicker just to brush these in, and I ended up hand brushing the whole thing. And when it comes to these smaller areas here, it just was very quick to just give a nice even coat all over in the decayed metal with the hairy brush. And it's very much the same thing with the tracks here. Sometimes I will airbrush my tracks first and mask them off and then do the rest. Tracks are always a pain to paint. Some people will glue them on separately afterwards. I try not to do that too much. I always mess up the paint with super glue when I do that. That's just me. So I'm just painting the tracks here myself, painting them in with the hairy brush, and it didn't take too long at all. This is always one of the most tricky or annoying parts, is to get in to the inside of the tracks, and especially if you want to leave the road wheels the same colour as the armour body rather than just metallics. If you paint them metallic, then it's a lot quicker. But I wanted this to kind of follow the painting kind of style that you'd find with a real world World War II tank or something like that maybe. So the road wheels are likely to be the same colour as the rest of the armour. So with all those metallics down, including the exhaust and the oil drums at the back, it's time for a quick layer of gloss varnish. And I'm doing this just on the armour areas. I'm trying not to get it onto the metallics because I like the effect that they're going to have by not doing that. It doesn't matter if there's a little bit of overspray. This is black metal from Scale Colour Paint Drop range. I usually use the Metal and Alchemy range, which is a standard paint you can thin and put for the airbrush. This is designed just for airbrushes. They didn't have any of the standard in stock. It's pretty much the same colour. It goes for the airbrush very nicely. I haven't really thinned it. Will I keep buying it? If it's available and the other one isn't, I suppose I will. But what I'm doing here is actually giving it quite a thin coat. I want lots of that decayed metal to show through, and I've deliberately faded it from one end to the other. I want there to be a visible sort of brown undertone. I'm using the same colour here on the exhausts and the spare fuel drums at the back as well. Not masked off here, just using the control to make sure that I don't overspray, using the angle that I aim the spray at as well, so the overspray would aim away from the tank or towards other areas that are able to be metallic. And then just doing a very thin line around the centre of the tracks, just where the light would hit. Extremely thin again. I want it to look brown. I know I've said that before, but it's quite important. It's got this brownish tone. It's part of the paint scheme for the whole army, is there to be lots of sort of warmish colours coming through. And here what I'm doing is just using a little bit of black just to kind of make the end of the guns look all sooty and dirty from firing. I'm actually using a contrast black here for the end, but you could use any colour you want. It's just got quite a nice finish. This is Black Legion, quite a nice matte finish when it dries, which was perfect. I decided not to go for the kind of colour heat bloom things again for that theme for the army I'm working on. And then when I had that Black Legion in the airbrush, I also added it to the exhaust at the back as well, deliberately allowing it to overspray around just a little bit where the soot would cover the paintwork in other areas. I'm here also adding a little bit on those engine vents at the back as well, which I'd also think would be quite oily and sooty, and it gives quite a nice effect. With the varnish fully dry, it was time to add the decals. I've already done a short tutorial on how to do this. I'll pop a little link in now rather than making this video too long, but using Microsol and Microset is just the way to do it. Now it's time for white grey from Model Colour, and the reason I've grabbed the white is to blank out some areas that have now covered in a metallic paint or other things like that. So I'm basically returning them to a colour that I can then paint over the top of more easily. So this area here is some leather strapping that holds these fuel drums to the back of the tank. I always thought it was a weird thing to see on these tanks, to find a little bit of leather, but I'm also adding a little bit of white inside these sort of side viewing slots here, and I've done a little L, and then I just wet my brush a little bit and just blend it out. It's quite hard to see here, but the top part of the window is still quite dark and black, and we're going to go over that with another colour afterwards, so effectively this is underpainting. And that underpainting continues here now with these little lenses. So I'm just doing a little dot and then a little half moon. I'm going to paint over these as well with a glaze, and those will show through, making it look like lens glare. You can continue that even further as I do here. We're just adding little white dots underneath the grill of this light here, and another little L which I blend out here, and a little dot underneath. This is Contrast Warp Lightning, and I love this really bright, vibrant green, as you can imagine, and just do a nice thin glaze layer over those little white marks we did, and they show through, and it just looks like lens glare. It's really, really perfect. If it's too thin, you can see the white marks too much, you just give another thin layer over the top, and then when you finish, you just cover it in gloss varnish, and it looks all nice and shiny. You can probably see it even better at this little side sort of access window here. You can even see the white line still showing a little bit stronger along the bottom, so you get a really nice sort of glow effect. And it's so much easier than trying to highlight up 2 or 3 layers of green. The Spirit Stone technical paints are fantastic for it as well. I didn't have a green one. I used to use that the same way as before, but the red here is perfect just for adding for those little red lights there, and also for this little targeting red light there. So now that those decals are fully set and I have protected them with a thin coat of gloss varnish, I'm just giving a little dry brush over most of the tank with this. I'll explain a little bit more detail. So this is Game Air Silver. It's a very light, bright silver. I brushed so much of it off the brush that there's next to nothing left. And I'm giving the faintest little tickles over all of the straight edges on the tank there. Just where the paint would wear away through constant use for knocking into things, people climbing on it, touching. And just going around and giving a little brush. Not only does this replace edge highlighting, which is not really the kind of look I'm going for here on this more military modelling style version of the tank, or at least military modelling light, that just giving this nice little ticker here just picks out those edges where the paint would wear away, just makes it look so worn. Such a cool effect, so easy to do. The main trick is less is more, and making sure that you've hardly got anything on your brush at all, even if it means you've got to go back a few times, because you don't want to get any streaks of silver paint across those nice flat areas. And if you're getting that, you've got too much paint on your brush. As you can see here when I'm zoomed in, just that faint tickle just really picks out the edge on those turret covers. Time for a little bit of contrast Cygor brown, and now that white is dry, I can go in and just give a nice thin coat on those. That may well be enough, especially with weathering, but I will come back and off camera I'm afraid, but I highlighted this with Hull Red from Model Colour. And now that those contrast paints have dry, I can go in and do that little bit of gloss varnish I talked about earlier on, just protecting that contrast paint, which is more susceptible to wearing off, but also adding that shine, which enables the glow to look even more realistic. Goes well over these lights here at the front, and also protects the Spirit Stone red. And that's all the main colours down without any oil weathering, which we're going to go on to do next. But if you wanted to leave it like this, you absolutely could. You could add a few more bits of mud and stuff here, but it's perfect. But I'm going to use some oil washes, and this is a dark mud from the Soilworks range from scale 75. It's sort of ready mixed oil wash. It's a darkish, umberish brown, a bit like an Agrax Earthshade kind of colour. And again, if you've watched my videos, you'll have heard me bang on about this quite a lot. Agrax Earthshade is great stuff. I use it, but I'm more likely to use an oil wash like this. The reason being is it runs into all the recesses. So those of you who have seen panel liners being used, those of you who've seen the AK streaking stuff, all that kind of stuff, it's very, very similar to that and works in the same way. You do need an old brush. Definitely don't want to be using any of your nice brushes because you'll destroy them. It's obviously not water soluble, this stuff, so it smells a little bit stronger. You want to make sure that you should be wearing gloves, unlike I am here. But what I'm doing is just sort of painting it around, letting it run into all the recesses, painting on some streaks and things there, going around all the rivets. It just runs around it. But the beauty of oil paints is you can play around with them afterwards. And unlike a standard wash that once it dries, that's it in place, we can go back with some Artist White Spirit in a moment and really clean these up and manipulate them and move them around, and they'll take a long, long time to dry. You'll see those techniques continue as we get to the side of the tank. I'm just dropping it on and let it run around the detail. It takes no work at all here, just around these little embossed rivet areas. It just really runs into all those gaps. So you're shading and you're also weathering at the same time. You can see here I'm doing fairly rough streaks down, but I'm going to manipulate those later, straighten them up and make them exactly the shape I wanted to. So I'm just sketching out the first area right now. You can just see how easily this stuff runs into all that detail. And when it dries, it will be very, very matte. It will look like a mixture of shadow, but also sort of earth and dirt and anything in ground you'd expect on a tank. For the tracks, I gave them a thin overall colouring, allowing them to go into all those recesses. We've already given them a bit of a dry brush. We've already given them that slight subtle highlight with the airbrush as well. But predominant colour still is that decayed metal showing through, which is what I wanted. And this brown will just sort of tone that all back down again. Now for the trusty Artist White Spirit. There's loads of different versions of White Spirit thinners that you can use for this. You can see here just another old brush. I'm just dipping it in the White Spirit. With a clean paper towel there to take the excess off, and I'm just tidying up. So on the top of those little marks there, you can see that it pulls a little bit. You've got tide marks. You can just blend it out, feather it away, clean it off the flat surfaces, leaving it in all those recesses. And you can start doing this from the moment that it's surface dry. But even if you did leave it overnight, you could still come back and do this. Now, when you're adding so many oils like this, it does help a little bit to protect the tank with a gloss varnish, but you don't have to do that. But it does make it a little bit easier to clean up. And I don't use gloss varnishes when I'm using oil washes on infantry models and things very often, unless they're Space Marines, this is power armoured. But for things like this, that subtle gloss varnish has really aided it. And the other reason I used the gloss varnish was because you really want that before you apply your decals. And if you go and watch that decal tutorial I linked, that will explain that in more detail. But what you're watching me do here really is just tidy up like I said I would on those streak marks, going down and thinning them out, making them look a little bit straighter, removing the edges which look like wet tide marks, so you've got this much more pinpointed rivulet of water that's run down the side of the tank, or maybe washed some dirt away or washed some dirt down into a thin line, and just thin out the little bits around the rivets as well where they're on too heavy. And it's just so easy to do, and it's such a pleasing effect. And for the tracks, what I've decided to do is just wipe away the excess with a sponge. And this is another way you can use oil paints. So I'm just gently rubbing any oils that are actually on the surface of the tracks. But there's so much detail, so many rivulets, it just leaves it in all the recesses. And then we move back to the Game Air Silver again. You want to wait the oils to fully dry for this. Again, I'm not doing a full dry brush all over, but a couple of areas the oil washers have dulled it a little bit. I just wanted to make a few areas pop and stand out. So I'm just giving it, again, the faintest of dry brushes. This stuff's coming quite well known now, but I'm using it for years. So this is Rust from Dirty Down, and this is water soluble, which is really, really handy because it enables you to manipulate it and play with it. So I just add a little dot, and I'm just painting this little rust streak down, again with an old brush. But what you can keep doing with this stuff is to keep building it up. So you could add a first layer, thin it with water, blend it out so it looks like sort of rust that's washing away. And then you can build it up by stippling on and doing little bits and keep building the layers, like you can see in this corner here. And it really gets darker there. So it's really up to you how corroded you make an area look. I know some people will say, well, these tanks wouldn't rust because they're made out of X or Y, but I think we're all cool here, and I think they look so much better worn and weathered on service duty. Like any effect, you can go too heavy, so less is more. This isn't a Death Guard tank, but I wanted to add enough to break up the colours that are already there and just add a little bit of extra interest. Deer Armour FX from Vallejo, thick mud, European mud. They got different colours for this. They got lots of different types as well. If you look for the earth texture, it's more like sterling mud basing. This is much more of an effect, and if you apply it really thick, it looks like thick wet mud, like the thing you'd expect in the Somme or in the Battle of the Bulge of World War II, something really horrible and messy. Now, if you apply it just a little bit, like I am here, stippling little marks on, when it dries looking quite dry, and if you apply some powders over the top, which I'm going to in a moment, it just adds a little bit of extra texture, which is what I'm going for here. Now, these are Vallejo pigments. I'm using Green Earth and Light Sienna here. There's so many different brands of pigments out there, and most of them work pretty much the same. I'm using an old makeup brush here just to brush them in dry into the tracks. Mostly the Light Sienna, but I'm also going to be adding little patches of the Green Earth, which is almost a whitish colour. Like I mentioned, it's not quite a desert look I'm going for, but a desert-ish stroke, sort of arid ash wastes kind of thing. And I'm brushing this into all of the detail on the tracks and towards the bottom of the tanks. And I'll always get comments about this, and I'll always cover it. Doesn't it just rub off? Don't you have to set and seal your pigments with a pigment fixer? Yes, you can do that, but as soon as you get it wet and applied on there, it won't show up the way it does now. There are plenty of ways of applying pigments, and if you want to do it that way, you can make up almost a wash with it, and that's great. That's a good way of doing it. This is the way I'm doing this here. I'm brushing it into the detail, and I will blow away the excess. And what I'm interested in is what's left in the detail rather than what's on the flat surface of the miniature. You'll be surprised how long it stays there and how much of it stays there. I do this for a lot of my work, in fact nearly all of my tanks and things, and it just doesn't come off. You don't need to always fully fix it. Just adding a final little touch here, and this is just some Rhinox hide and a sponge. I'm just adding a few little bits of sponge chipping just to add it again, and just another little bit of interest, another little colour here and there, just to show where stones would have flicked up and taken the paint off and maybe left the primer underneath. And there we are, it's all done. And with the crew added as well, I didn't include them as part of this tutorial. It would have added far too much time, but I'm very happy with the way it looks. Well, thank you for making it to the end of the video. And just before I show you all the final proper pictures of the Rogal Dorn tank, if you'd like to support the channel further, please do consider giving this video a like, leaving a comment below, even subscribing to the channel. It really helps this video reach a wider audience, get shown to more people, and really supports the channel. The channel has a lovely, friendly Discord. There's a link in the video description below if you'd like to join that and talk about all things gaming and painting for absolutely any game system under the sun. And if you'd like to support the channel even further, I do have a Patreon as well. There's a link in the video description also for that. There are a number of tiers from basic support right up to some tuition and help and coaching with painting and things like that. So if you like what you've seen in this video and you'd like me to do that kind of thing one-on-one with you, at least over Zoom, that is one of the options. Anyway, to the pictures. I absolutely love painting tanks in this style, and it's kind of a military modelling light kind of style. It's nice to see more and more people doing this style now. I started doing it when I started painting Horus Heresy tanks a few years ago. I definitely use it on my World War II stuff, be that Bolt Action or Flames of War. But I just love painting tanks like this and using oil washes and using weathering powders and things. I have so much fun doing it. I mean, if you haven't done it, haven't tried it, I definitely recommend it. That tanks just look so cool on the battlefield when they look realistic like that. And there's so many fun things to do, which I don't believe take an awful lot of skill or learning. As I briefly mentioned earlier, I haven't painted the crew as part of this tutorial. I just thought it would have made it too long and added too much time. It essentially would be an infantryman tutorial in the middle of a tank tutorial. If people are interested in seeing how I painted these, I can demonstrate that using a guard infantryman. I will be painting them for my little project. Now, I will cover it slightly in a video I have planned for the whole army project, but if enough people comment and say I want to see the infantry tutorial, I will record a separate tutorial. So make sure you get your comment below if that's something you're interested in. And make sure you let me know what you think. Do you paint in this style? Is it something you want to try out? What do you think of the colour scheme? I'm looking forward to getting the rest of the force painted myself. But thank you very much for watching. Take care, and I'll catch you soon.